so we might have people coming this way.
Okay, just a minute. Yeah, go on.
Tu donnes-nous à peu près une
Ça y est.
seconde. Là.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Euh,
Just tell me when I'm live.
ok, ça c'est moi. Attends, là c'est allé. Regarde. Ok.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen around the world. I apologize for the delay. We've had a bit of delay in getting the event started as a result of some of the COVID requirements here in the facility. So please bear with us. The press conference here will start in just a couple of minutes, featuring Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, the Executive Secretary for the Convention on Biological Diversity. So again, everyone, please be patient. We will start the press conference in just a couple of minutes for the event. So you'll see probably an empty screen here for a moment or two, but we'll bring the Executive Secretary on board. Thanks very much. Okay, so we'll just leave that.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We're just waiting for the Executive Secretary to come to the space. We'll start in just a couple of minutes, so I do encourage you to stay online, and we'll start this very brief opening press conference for the Geneva meetings. Thank you very much. So the live stream has started because we have a mixture of people, but that's fine. Okay, come on, stay. We'll get started, everyone, because we're so delayed now.
Hello.
Nice to see you in person.
Now, good to see you in person, not on the camera.
Okay, so Elizabeth, I think you should sit there because I'll be the best framing for you. We've got people looking at online too.
Where they are not seeing.
They're all over there. They're all over there. Great. Good. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My apologies for the delay. The first day of the conference in a new venue, people getting organized or accustomed to the COVID testing requirements has led to a few delays. My name is David Ainsworth. I'm the Information Officer here at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this opening press conference of the Geneva meetings, the resumed sessions of the subsidiary body on science, technology, and technological assessment, the subsidiary body on implementation, and the working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. For today's press conference, we'll have the Executive Secretary to the Convention, Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, who will provide a few remarks, and she'll be here to take questions for the few people who are here in Geneva. Well, because we're a little bit delayed, I think I'll turn right away and let the Executive Secretary deliver a few remarks. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. As we all know, within the next few minutes, we'll have our 3 meetings official opening. And as David has indicated, 2 subsidiary bodies, one on science, the other one on implementation, but also the working group responsible for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Why these 3 meetings are taking place at the same time? First, of course, major has been the result of postponement of all our meetings during the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And 2, we have the responsibility to catch up with that lost time so that then we have, as soon as we can, our conference of the parties, which has also been postponed 3 times. So holding them one by one, then it means we'll have the COP next year. And we are trying, now that the health conditions, a pandemic situation is improving, to have it this year at a date to be announced, hopefully, during this time when we meet here. And more so, the 2 subsidiary bodies also have a responsibility to provide feedback and elements to the work of the working group on the development of the framework. So the working group will not meet before the science and implementation bodies complete their work and provide those recommendations to feed into the framework. And that's why then is this mosaic of all the 3 meetings meeting in the next 2.5 weeks here. But all of them, we have this one goal, which is to bend the curve on biodiversity loss and really to build that shared future to live in harmony with nature in the long term. So whether it's the science body, implementation body, the framework, which is our blueprint pathway to building that future, living in harmony with nature, comes in and will feed into that. What will be, of course, key for these meetings is to complete all the unfinished work. All these bodies have been meeting virtually in the last 2 years, so they did not rest. And we hope the momentum has been there in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, actually, the positive aspect, of course, we're in solidarity with all the losses we made globally. People we have lost as the result of COVID, the loss of economic development for all the countries virtually. But for our processes, the positive aspect is the extra time we have had to prepare for what we are having in the coming 2-3 weeks. All stakeholders have been consulted in the process of the last 2 years, be it the women, the youth, indigenous peoples, local communities, the business, the financial sector, NGOs, private sector, all have actually been engaged through different virtual meetings processes, either by different stakeholders, a combination. And I think if one looks at the draft framework to be now in-person negotiated here, all these key stakeholders can see themselves in that framework. And I think that is a demonstration of the contribution they've been able to put into that drafting process. We are not saying it's a foolproof, otherwise we will not be meeting here. Our parties had insisted to meet in person so that then they can finalize the negotiation. And we have here not just the parties, we have all the stakeholders, I'm sure with an interest to make sure their contributions are still going to be reflected in the framework itself. The good thing with our processes, and particularly getting the inputs of the stakeholders, is that when any stakeholder makes a recommendation, we only just need one party to second that recommendation. Then it's taken on board, either in the report or considered in the further future iterations of, be it decisions of the conference of the parties or now the framework itself. So we're not talking of 2/3 or 1/3, we just need one party. And this really is a unique situation to really get the input of stakeholders in our processes. We hope and looking forward for really positive discussions, negotiation this week. We have seen in the last 2 years the commitment of political leaders, be it pledge for nature. If we go back to the Glasgow Climate Summit and how biodiversity was on the table for discussion, we almost forgot whether we are in the climate COP, the way biodiversity, forest, land, soil had been part of the discussions. And that was for the first time in the Climate Change Summit. We've seen the High Ambition Coalition, again leaders committing to really reversing and halting biodiversity loss. So we hope this political momentum, political will which has been demonstrated in the last two years, and not forgetting the UN Biodiversity Summit we had in September 2020, all this we hope will propel better discussions which are beginning today. So we hope the needs are there, commitments have been demonstrated, and looking forward for effective, transparent discussions to ensure that we really get that ambitious, transformative, universal, realistic, action-oriented post-2020 global biodiversity framework to be adopted at our second part of the Conference of the Parties later this year. Maybe I stop there.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So I'll invite the reporters who are here in Geneva to take questions. When you ask your questions, just introduce yourselves, although I know that Elizabeth knows at least one of you already. So please, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Christiana with the German Press Agency. Good to see you here in Geneva. If you look ahead 2.5 weeks from now, how do you think the draft framework that you have now is going to be altered? How much do you think is still open in 2.5 weeks to be taken on in Kunming then?
There are still a number of issues to be discussed here. And that's what will help us mark whether how much progress will be made. Issues, for instance, digital sequence information is still on the table. Resource mobilization still on the table. We will have a discussion on the gender action plan for the implementation of the framework when it is adopted. Also capacity building action plan for the implementation of the framework when it is adopted. When we talk resource mobilization, is increasing resources from all sources, and how much additional commitments will be made, because otherwise we can have a beautiful document as the framework, but if that will not be implemented to really have an impact on the ground, then we'll have lost. So those issues. What other issues? Of course, we've heard of all the 30 by 30 expansion of the protected areas. Much as at political level there's been that big push but it doesn't mean it's agreed yet by all, so we'll see whether now finally that will be cemented here or still open for further discussion. We are also aware stakeholders, particularly indigenous peoples, local communities, are concerned with that to ensure that there will be appropriate safeguards if at all that new 30 by 30 accepted. Safeguards in terms of their rights or rights-based approach, safeguards in terms of their land rights, their human rights, and the like. So these safeguards might be important not to overlook in terms of that, that increased area. I think so. What I can remember.
The other issue is the issue of redirection subsidies.
Oh yes, key one
Yeah.
and important. Repurposing, redirecting subsidies. We know currently $500 billion are spent each year on harmful subsidies. So how then these financial flows can move away from nature negative to biodiversity positive outcomes will be key. And if the framework draft is talking of requiring about $700 billion per year, if this 500 is put on the table into biodiversity positive outcomes, then automatically we know that gap to be filled has been reduced by almost 3/4. So the resources are there, but can that be redirected into biodiversity positive activities as opposed to harmful activities? We have seen, of course, also questions of pollution, plastic, which is also an item or a target in the framework. And the UN Environment Assembly has adopted a decision calling by 2024 a legally binding agreement, international agreement on plastics. And this will have also an influence in the negotiations here, particularly will further strengthen that aspect of the pollution target in the draft framework.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much.
Fritz Habekus with the German weekly Die Zeit. You pointed out that you have had more time to invite everyone to participate in the process, but it also means that you might have lost 2 years, one could also say.
Yes.
So I wonder in what way did that compromise the process? And the second question is...
Let's deal with one first,
Okay.
if I forget. Indeed, we've benefited from the 2 years, but of course, yes, we've lost 2 years. But the good thing, the 2 years have been active as far as biodiversity agenda is concerned at all levels. I mean, and that's why we had the UN Biodiversity Summit at heads of state level. We had the One Planet Summit, again at head of state level. We have had now, as I mentioned, the High Ambition Coalition, the Pledges for Nature. We have Finance for Nature, Business for Nature. I mean, all these happened and initiatives which happened and were basically initiated in the last 2 years, which have helped to keep the momentum high on the biodiversity agenda. COVID itself has even brought to the individual, family, personal level a better understanding of the impacts of biodiversity loss on nature. The relationship between biodiversity or relationship between our activities and nature. That probably it's because of our unsustainable activities which have led to where we are, as the scientists are telling us, and continue to prove that. Expansion of big chunks of agricultural land, deforestation, basically interfering with the animal kingdom in their lands as the result. And we ended up with a transmission of pathogen or zoonotic diseases from animals, which are not harmful to animals, but to human and harmful to human. And as the result of tourism, trade, all the movement, affecting one another, and virtually the whole world went into a standstill.
Great, thank you very, very much. Another question over here?
Hi, good morning. Emma Farge from Reuters. I'm sorry if you've already been asked this. I didn't realize I had to do a COVID test this morning, so apologies.
Protecting your health.
Yes, and yours. I have two questions, but we'll do one at a time as you prefer.
And he did not finish his second.
Has a decision on the timing and the format already been taken on Kunming? And if not, when will it formally be taken in the next 2 weeks?
The dates are yet to be announced, and what we are gathering from our host, government of China, within these 2 weeks, if not this morning, we'll have, they will announce the exact dates. But so far we are looking towards summer, end of summer, I hope, unless that has changed. In terms of the format of the conference of the party is agreed already by the parties themselves at the last conference in terms of the agenda, what needs to be done to be adopted. Of course, our host will help us with the administrative, logistic arrangements of where is the meeting place, where do we sit, where will the press be. And I was in Kunming. The press have a beautiful big place. I don't think you can feel it. So that, and now once we know the dates, actually firm discussions with our host now will continue in terms of all the details. Right now, yes, discussions are there, but you know, unless you know the dates, you take it loosely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do we,
Hold on
Maybe
just a second.
complete-
Yeah, I have to apologize. I sort of ruined the flow there right away. Why don't I let you finish with your second question, Mike? My apologies. You finish your second question, and then Emma will take back to you, and then Christiane again.
Thank you.
And then I've got some questions from online as well. Thanks.
It actually is like, it connects to what you talked about earlier. And my question is, has there been with the Ukraine crisis now, with like a lot of money going into COVID measures or anti-COVID measures, do you see that there is political will being redirected from changing things about biodiversity? Do you think there's like an attention deficit on that huge topic?
I don't know what to say, but of course, the moment that there are those, what we call emergency situation, unexpected situation, will have a ripping effect on other important issues. But what we need to remember, whatever actions are taken, at the end of the day, what is being mostly affected? It will be nature. So we hope, even as we build or we get into a reconstruction stage, that environmental issues will be built in from the beginning. And even the international principles and laws on war, there are already those, I would say, measures whereby areas of, to ensure that the weapons of mass destructions do not impact the environmental installations, for instance. The question is whether they are followed or not is a different story. But at least the principles of law are there, which ought to be observed. And we hope that in future, when the situation improves, and of course now we're all dealing with the emergency situation, even the UN, we've heard recently even WHO announcing almost $20 million to help the healthy situation in Ukraine. Secretary General had announced also, was it 40 million emergency fund to support the emergency situation. So just as COVID began, we are all concentrated with the emergency situation to save lives. So once the lives are sorted out, and we are back into hopefully peaceful situation, then we hope then these issues are part and parcel of that green recovery, just the way we say green recovery post-COVID situation.
Great, okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Emma, why don't you go ahead, and then Christiane will have you follow up after.
Thanks so much. Obviously, 2 weeks of negotiations ahead. But what targets do you feel there is already consensus around? Which ones are in the bag? Is the 30% target in the bag, or which other ones do you think are kind of definites that will come out of Geneva?
We have 21 targets in the draft. And we always say nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So virtually all the targets are subject to negotiation this week. And the fact that negotiators are meeting for the first time since the zero draft was launched. The zero draft was launched, they met in Rome, and soon after we went into COVID until now. So clearly that indicates nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And this is what will happen in the next 2.5 weeks.
Great, thank you. Christiane, go ahead.
Yeah, the zero draft is the one that's currently on the table.
No. Zero draft was launched in January 2020. The current one was launched July last year.
Okay.
We had a meeting, but it was virtual in August. But still the parties decided that July draft is the one subject of discussions these 2 weeks.
My question was, do you know whether a Russian delegation is here to participate?
Not from the capital. Actually, the flight of the delegation had been cancelled. So probably if they managed to travel, I'm not sure. But that's the last report I had yesterday.
So you think there might be someone from the mission here, or you think there won't be any Russian representation?
Probably from the mission, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
But we're expecting a delegation from the capital. But the report I got, the flight was cancelled.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if they've made it or not.
Just for administrative purposes, the meeting is meant to be in person for everyone, but there are some parties who are simply unable to attend. And so special permission was given for them to connect virtually. And so in the event that we have problems with the Russian delegation or the UK
Then they
delegation,
can participate.
they have that ability to do so. But as the executive secretary said, it's really at the last minute we'll know what the status is in this case. But apart from countries that have got the special permission, it is really hoped that there will be at least one person sitting at the desk for these meetings. Just in terms of online, there was only one question we got here from Hans Thomas Krumenacker from the Reef Reporter team. Hello, Hans Thomas. But I think that's very similar to the question we got from the colleague in terms of will there be any impacts on finance as a result of the conflict in Ukraine? But I believe the executive secretary has pointed this out already. Okay, good. We can take some more questions from the floor here.
Do you expect any commitments, financial commitments from governments here?
I don't think, yes and no, but because this is more, I will say, technical negotiations of the framework. Commitments, we expect them at the conference of the parties, because by then we'll know which targets have gone through. Just the way during the first part, we had a number of commitments, pledges, which were made at the time, including pledge commitment to help us to continue support this negotiation process.
Emma, go ahead.
Since the question was asked about Russia, can I ask it about Ukraine? Any updates of whether they'll have a delegation here?
Ukraine, they will participate virtually, they will not travel. So probably the ambassador might be here just for the opening, but not other session. Because the arrangement, as David has explained, this is an in-person meeting. So only those present in the meeting venue will be able to take the floor and participate. Other delegations can participate virtually, but not with the speaking rights. They can speak through their delegation present here. Except, and so far we had about 4 or 5 countries which will not be here and do not even have an embassy here, which will participate then those virtually. And most of these are the Pacific island states.
Yeah, I can give you the list if you need. It is a very
Okay.
small list.
Okay.
Any more questions from the floor here? Go ahead.
So as we all know, the IG targets have all been missed. So I wonder, in terms of Well, to generalize it in the German.
Some of them were partially achieved, indeed.
Well, yeah, but, so, like looking at the new negotiations for the new framework, what would you think would be points where you can say that it's really a hard-hitting target and something that is really also maybe, how do you know that what is negotiated here and then later in Kunming is really a step ahead compared to what was negotiated in Aichi?
Okay, first, indeed the Aichi targets globally were not met, but there was a lot of progress at national level. The problem was national commitments had not been aligned with the global goals. And of course, our assessment was looking at the global goals and not at the national targets, which for some countries or some areas, some had even surpassed actually the global targets. The failure generally of meeting the Aichi targets provided us lessons which are being used for now the development of the framework. For instance, the 20 Aichi targets were expected and anticipated to be implemented by governments. While we know very well environmental issues, biodiversity, ecosystem is a cross-cutting transboundary issue, cannot just be implemented by one stakeholder. And learning from that is what I've indicated earlier on, that this time all stakeholders have been involved in the development of this framework with the assumption, anticipation that they will also be involved in the implementation. So if this happens, we hope we will have dealt with those, one would say, inadequacies of the Aichi targets implementation. 1, 2, when the Aichi targets were adopted, many countries or many parties took a step back and began with the review and updating of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans, which was a tool for national implementation for the Aichi targets and the biodiversity strategic plan, which was adopted then. And that process, being a national consultative process, took 3-4 years before it was completed. So in practical terms, while we say Aichi targets were for 10 years, but practically were half a decade. So if probably we were given another 5 years countries to implement, probably a number of them could have been met. But actually the counting, yes, 10 years, but practically it was not 10 years. It was 6, at most 5 years. So for that reason, we hope that now the framework, when it is adopted, implementation will be able to begin immediately. Why? Because the national strategies and action plans are already in place, and those can begin with the implementation. While then, if countries seem necessary to update them, they can be updated as implementation continues. 1, 2, fortunately we have UNDP, UNEP, and Global Environmental Facility already committing and supporting countries to prepare, even as negotiation continues, to fast track and prepare to begin implementation immediately. So we are not waiting for the framework to be adopted. The groundwork is already in place to be able to bridge that gap and begin implementation immediately, particularly supporting countries to decide and determine their national commitments, their national targets, responding to the global targets to be adopted under the framework.
So the, excuse me, the target date is not going to be pushed back just because we lost 2 years because of COVID?
We don't know. We'll see what the parties decide. But
is that a possibility that it's not 230?
Even if it is not, 230 is still an important year. because these targets are also aligned to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 2030. You know, if we look at the 17 goals, actually 14 goals of the 17 will need contribution from the biodiversity community or biodiversity angle. So 2030 is still important, and that's why I'm saying countries continue to implement the Aichi biodiversity targets, or as the country continue to implement to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, they are actually already implementing aspects or some of the targets under the framework. So 2030 will still be key in terms of how then the biodiversity community will have responded to the SDGs. And at that time, probably it could be a midterm review, even if the period is expanded, but review of how we'll be faring 2030. And that's why the framework will be accompanied with a monitoring, monitoring accountability framework or mechanism to be able to measure progress as we go along. A mechanism which lacked during the when Aichi biodiversity targets were adopted. And that's why we are not successful to measure progress as the years went by. But that gap now will be filled with this mechanism, which will be adopted together with the framework itself.
Can I add one more? Did you hear specifically from delegations that they might be pushing for this period to be extended, for the dateline to be moved back? Did you hear that from
No,
some
no.
countries? But you think
I've
it might
not
happen?
entertained. Because no, I've not checked. But we will see as these negotiations go by.
Emma, go ahead.
What do you expect to be the biggest sticking points over the next 2 weeks of negotiations? And this is a bit technical, but whose job is it to kind of bring those positions together? Is that your job to kind of try and get that consensus? Are you in that brokering role?
This process, we call it, is party-driven.
Mm-hmm.
So the parties are on the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
We, the Secretariat, basically support
Mm-hmm.
and create that environment for them to be able to negotiate. Even much as we have the co-chairs for the framework, but yes, the co-chairs are from the parties. So it's, you can see it is a party-driven process led by two parties, Uganda and Canada.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the biggest sticking points, what do you expect them to be in Geneva?
As I had indicated
Sorry.
earlier, one is the digital sequencing information, the resource mobilization and resources for the implementation of the framework, the monitoring accountability framework to measure progress, and the indicators for that purpose. So that needs to be agreed, because then parties will be accountable to report on that. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, might not be sticking, but might be subject to discussion, 30 by 30 conservation areas, basically moving from 17 terrestrial of Aichi and 10 marine now to 30 by 30. And of course, the push we might get from NGOs and indigenous people to secure safeguards which will protect their land rights, will protect their rights to land, their traditional knowledge rights, their cultural rights, human rights. So basically the rights-based approach into the implementation of this. And of course, what is more important is not just the quantity of expanding the area, but the quality of managing those areas. If there will be no effective management of those increased conservation areas, then we will have missed the ball.
We have a question online. Urmi Goswami from the Economic Times has written, and he said, there's been a lot of talk about nature-based solutions, and the recent UNEA, United Nations Environment Assembly, defined NBS, and he asks, are you concerned that there could be a conflict between nature-based solutions and biodiversity loss? And he explains, he says, in terms of, you know, for example, could there be a conflict, for example, between agroforestry and the conservation of natural forests?
Yes, nature-based solution is an aspect not yet has been discussed, but it does not appear yet in the framework. But the fact that now UNEA has agreed on a definition, and we are talking of the same current member states of the UN, other parties to the convention, probably that might have an influence, positive influence in the discussions here. Nature-based solution has so far been used in the climate discussions, but of course, the biodiversity nature would like to put the definition which responds to the nature angle. So we shouldn't be surprised that either if it is agreed, it might be further redefined so that then the nature angle is clearly reflected into that definition and not being seen in the context of the climate usage or definition, as has been the case so far. But we hope now the UNEA definition brings that neutrality, since it looks at environment in the bigger picture and not in the narrower sense.
Well, thank you, everyone. I just got a notice from the rest of the team that the Executive Secretary is needed to head to the plenary. So thank you very much, Elizabeth, for your time. Thank you to those of you here in Geneva and to those of you who followed us online. Just a quick announcement is that we will have another press conference at 12 p.m. today, Central European Time. Not with us. Marco Lambertini of WWF and Eva Zabe of Business for Nature will be giving a press conference on the definition of nature positive and some of the work that they've been doing on that. Another interesting thing. And then later on this afternoon, I believe it's at 4 p.m. CET time, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network will also be here to give a presentation on their positioning and views with regard to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So thank you, Elizabeth. We'll let you go to the podium, and all of you begin to get ready to follow the plenary here in Geneva, or those of you online. Thanks very much, and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good.
Hi, Emma.
Good.
Hi.
Well, thanks for rolling with that,
So
everybody, with all the
unusual
delays,
still
etc.
to see people.